right. Okay, so today, as many of us know, um, you know, we venerate the holy new martyrs and confessors of Russia. We commemorate them and the uncounted millions of faithful who suffered and died at the hands of the Soviet atheists. These include the Tsar martyr Nicholas II and the rest of the Russian royal family. That's Patriarch Tikhon as well, Grand Duchess Elizabeth. Thousands of martyrs, both clergy and laity, whose names are known, but also millions upon millions um, of simple believers whose names have been lost to history. Um, the number of the new martyrs of Russia far exceeds of all those from the age of the martyrs of the first 3 centuries of Christianity, and may their memory be eternal. So, what I have planned for today, and what I figured I would do is read from a couple different papers. There's a paper by Vladimir Moss. It's entitled, let's see, The Masonic Plot Against Tsar Nicholas II. I'm going to be reading from this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in the chat for people. There's an academia link to the paper. So, all right. And hopefully everybody's having a blessed day today, that rewatch this or, sort of find it along the way. Um, so, I'm going to get to this paper now on the Masonic Plot Against Tsar Nicholas II. It's written by Vladimir Moss. And let's see. It says, if the October Revolution was highly engineered by Bolshevik Jays, the February Revolution, which preceded it and made it possible, was engineered by Masonic Russians under the direction of the Grand Orient of Paris. The Bolsheviks were not in general Masons. After the revolution, they suppressed Masonry in Russia, but played the same role as the Illuminati in the French Revolution, that of ultimate victors. But the question arises, were any of the leading Bolsheviks also Masons? According to the subdeacon Konstantin Preobrazinski, I've seen a couple of his works, formerly a lieutenant general of the KGB, he says, quote, one of the leaders of the KGB intelligence, Colonel, what's his name here? Lally Zamolsky or something here, was also a famous journalist and writer, who was also a famous journalist and writer. He was studying Masons on his own. Once I invited him to read a lecture on them for us, less than 10 officers, members of Group A of Directic T of the KGB, first Directate. Group A was a group of assistants to the head of scientific and technical intelligence. Major General Leonard Zitsev. Zamolsky told a lot of interesting things. In particular, he said that Lenin has left his signature in visitor books of one of the Masonic lodges in Switzerland, introducing himself as Brother Visitor. So that's pretty interesting. And I did find some things on Lenin being a Mason in my research, coming up to this video. So I'll go over that. Well, I could do that now, actually. Why not? So, what I found about Lenin, okay, and we're talking about Vladimir Lenin here. I found a website that, is on Web Archive. it was on the internet, but then you clicked the link and you couldn't really get to it. So it's kind of hidden. And as far as I know, the KGB doesn't want this information out. They kind of want to erase any connection with, a Bolshevik Freemasonic connection. Yeah, as far as I know. So let's see if we can get this kind of going real quick. Some trouble getting the page to load. So here we go. Okay. So I'm going to put this link also in the chat in case anybody is interested in this. It's a pretty rare document, I would say. So, hello, Denise. How you doing? Okay, so what the document says here. Let's see. Okay, it says what role did Freemasons, and Bolsheviks play in the Russian Revolution? The Russian Revolution, a significant event in modern history, was actually a battle of secret societies. In May 1917, officials were alerted about a German plot to take control of a secret society in Russia. They were alarmed as the repercussions of these actions would have been a global and not limited to Russia. Okay, and at one time, there was a photo of a ruined structure of the Tsar Alexander during the Russian Revolution, and I found those photos, but it's not available on the site anymore. And it's like a guy, kind of like tearing down the statue of one of the czars in Russia, and I assume he was a Bolshevik. So now all this is really important, and I'm going to get into why all this is important. Because all this plays a role in sort of the end times, believe it or not. And what if you look into this, many of us understand that as Orthodox Christians, that Tsar Nicholas II was the restrainer. That's actually mentioned in I think it's 2 Thessalonians or something like that, or 1 Thessalonians. It's one of those. So I'll find out in a moment, but I'll get to that in a second. I'm just jumping around a little too much. So it says Freemasons in the Russian Revolution. He was not only one who has sensed potential danger. Gerald Incas, known as Papus, had also warned of a similar thing. He was a physician, occultist, and a former spiritual advisor to the Russian Empire, and an envoy of the French Freemasonry and the organization of the Russian branch, a Martinist Freemason, and a secret agent of the French government. He had predicted that the Russian Revolution would be defined by the Russian Martinist. In early 1915, at the height of Germany and Russia's war, a Russian-born Marxist revolutionary went to German embassy in Constantinople with a plan. His name was Alexander Helphand, also known as Parvus, who was Leon Trotsky's mentor and friend. He proposed that with the financial help of Germany, Russians would be able to overthrow the Tsar and dissolve the Russian Empire. But another group of Freemasons outpaced Parvus in dethroning the Tsar. This group was the liberal members of the Duma, the Russian parliament. They belonged to a Masonic branch called the Grand Orient of the Peoples of Russia. So in the Vladimir Moss paper, he just said that, these people that were involved with the overthrow of the Tsar were a part of the Grand Orient. And, so I got to looking, and guess who was a part of the Grand Orient of these Freemasons? This was, Vladimir Lenin. So the whole Bolshevik group, whether they knew it or not, they had a Freemasonic leader. And anyways, so they were a majority in the parliament and overthrew the Tsar Nicholas. There were several Masonic groups in 1917 Russia. The biggest group was the Grand Orient with about 400 members. Although it was a small group, it proved to be highly influential in the coming months after they dethroned the Tsar. They formed a provisional government, all members of which were Freemasons. So the whole government, that overthrows the Tsar are nothing but Freemasons. I mean, that should tell you something. And, maybe, I don't know if it's going to be during this reading, but another reading I'm going to do is going to be Putin is a continuation of Soviet power. And what we're going to see is that the current leaders of the Moscow Patriarchate and Putin himself, they are not ashamed of their, uh, Soviet past. In fact, they almost venerate these Soviet people, these Freemasons, as saints. And many of the faithful involved with the ROC, which is the Russian Orthodox Church, tend to um, write polemics in defense of Stalin and Lenin and these people that killed millions of uh, Russian Orthodox and other religious people and just people in general in Russia. So it says, these Masonic brothers dominated not only the provisional government, but also other political groups in Russia. They were present in the socialist and Bolshevik groups too. For example, most of the leaders of the Petrograd Soviet, who were socialists, were also Freemasons. The most notable Freemasons among Bolsheviks were Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky. So, what did these groups want with politics? Did they want to expand their Masonic prevalence through the political action? Quite the opposite. They sought to pursue political agendas through Freemasonry. It says this is a transcript from the video series, The Real History of Secret Societies. Watch it now on the Great Courses Plus. I doubt that exists anymore. Like, again, this was on the web archive, and you can't even find it really anymore. So, well, not without looking, at least. But what about Bolsheviks? Can they be regarded as a secret society? After all, they were a political movement with Marxist ideologies. So I want to bring up something about Marx. Um, Marx went to a particular school and he studied under Hegel. And Hegel was like a political philosopher, I think in Germany, if I'm not mistaken. And what his whole idea was he was to push that the state was God. So Marxism sort of, that's the ideology that these people back. There is no more God, and that was the kind of thought behind the French Revolution as well. Is this great enlightenment pursued by logic and reason, and you know to cancel out faith. It was in a great direct opposition to faith, and institute reason and logic as God, and that's what they call it, the Enlightenment. But it's really kind of a dark age where man has abandoned God. But what about Bolsheviks? Can they be regarded as a secret society? After all, they were a political movement with Marxist ideologies, and nothing about them was secret. But a secret society is not defined as one with a secret underground existence. It is characterized by selective admissions, the importance of absolute loyalty, and the promise of special knowledge and status. Under this definition, Bolsheviks were considered a secret society. And when we get into the regicide, the act of killing the czar, what we're going to see is that these Bolsheviks wrote secret Kabbalistic, um, symbols on the house in which they killed the royal family, like all on the walls. And if I'm not mistaken, the translation to what was written on the walls was that well, I can't remember direct, but I have those notes, so I'm going to go to that in just a second. So, who were the Bolsheviks? The Bolsheviks first emerged as a small faction in the Russian socialist movement in 1903. Lenin had a majority vote in a socialist conference, although his faction was a minority. In fact, Bolsheviks, which means minority in Russian, were rivals with uh, Mensheviks, which means majority. Ironically, He had the major votes in the conference. Both Bolsheviks and Mensheviks were Marxists. They believed in a social justice. Okay, so this is what we're kind of seeing today with like like all the woke movement stuff in the country. This is called like the social justice movement, where everybody's sort of just offended about everything. It's a very idealistic way of thinking, but it's not really based in reality. It's just based in like kind of absurdism. I think that's the best way to put it. It's like very cynical, nihilistic, and absurd. Um, so they believe in social justice and an eventual victory of proletariat over capitalism. Now, here's something to point out. So there's a good form of capitalism. So the good form of capitalism is like a man has the ability to make his own business, and that business, he can provide for his family, and it's all his own doing, and he doesn't have anybody over him telling him what to do, and he's able to survive in the world, right? That's a good form of capitalism. A bad form of capitalism is like these globalists, like Soros or something. But uh, what these, the Marxists kind of push was like they kind of sold you on an idea. So the idea was like, oh, like capitalism's so outdated and like it's country bumpkin, like it's a stupid ideology, and we got to get with the progress, like we got to get with the times, kind of thing, right? And so it's like selling toothpaste to you or something. They'll be like, okay, like so your old toothpaste is crap, and this new toothpaste, this new whitening toothpaste is going to do everything that you need it to do. So that's how they kind of sold it, like this great plan. But it was entirely, delusional. It was like this utopian ideology, but really, so it's just like taking all of the power out of man's hands and putting it into, hands of the government, and all the resources in the hands of the government. Man doesn't really have a say in anything. And people went along with this. And we're seeing this now that after World War II, you know, the communists felt like they've lost the war. So what are they going to do? And so, since they can't win on the battlefield, so they're going to inject it into the culture through, our institutions. So they're going to put it, they're going to fan this propaganda through the colleges and through, media and newspapers. And, there's something that was called the 40 communist goals. You could probably find something like that. Uh, I forget the exact year, but I would read into that. And those 40 communist goals, we're seeing those play out today. So it says both Bolsheviks and what they differed in was the means of achieving this goal. Mensheviks believed in open action through mass worker parties, while Bolsheviks favored conspiratorial means carried out by a small vanguard revolutionary party. Under his mantra, quote, flexibility in means, flexibility in goals. Anything would be allowed as long as it was towards the ultimate goal. This is why Lenin eventually won over Mensheviks. How were the Bolsheviks funded? Politics cannot survive without money. Being fully aware of that, Lenin was always in search of financial resources to fund his party. And under their principal mantra that the end justifies the means. So, this mentality, the end justifies the means. This is a satanic, thought, that no matter what I do, it's very Machiavellian. No matter what I do, as long as, the end result. Well, what ends up happening is these people will throw the stone as far as they can, but they don't think of the heads they crack, And so they took any opportunity to get cash, from bank robbery to murder. For example, they stole 340,000 rubles from a Tiflis bank, and 40 people died and 50 were injured. A young Joseph Stalin was in that Bolshevik band that committed the robbery. Oh, so Joseph Stalin was there. So this guy was like a full blown criminal, really. um, abandoned it. But since the money that they earned from the bank robbery was not always easy to use as it was marked, they looked for more decent ways to avoid future trouble. One of these ways was to find wealthy supporters. Finally, with the help of these wealthy supporters, they seized power in Russia after the fall of the Tsar and established their government on the Petrograd Soviet. Common questions about the role of Freemasons and Bolsheviks in Russian Revolution. What is Vladimir Lenin famous for? Vladimir Lenin was a revolutionary Marxist who led the Russian Revolution. Lenin established the Bolshevik Party as a faction of the Russian Socialist Party. Who was behind the Russian Revolution? There are many forces involved in the Russian Revolution, including Freemasons. They all helped Lenin, the head of the Bolshevik Party, seize power and take control after the revolution. Why was Tsar Nicholas overthrown? The members of the Russian parliament, the Duma, were behind the overthrow of the Tsar. They were all Freemasons and formed the provisional government. What started the Russian Revolution? The Russian Bolsheviks was the uprising. The Russian Revolution was an uprising of Bolshevik workers against the last Tsar of Russia. They were led by Vladimir Lenin, who was originally a Marxist. So what happened was these guys were starting to spread propaganda throughout the land that that religion is oppressive and it's the opium of the people, and the czar is he's an idiot and he doesn't know how to help his people, and these people were just very nihilistic. And the czar was an Orthodox Christian, and he was put in place, ordained by God, uh, so we say that Christ is the King of Kings, but that's because we believe in a monarchy as Orthodox Christians. So, um, so I'll give you an example of what a proper monarchy is, just to get this concept down. So, now a government is secure. This is a quote from Father Seraphim Rose. He says, "Now a government is secure insofar as it has God for its foundation and its will for its guide. But this surely is not a description of liberal government. It is the liberal view of the people who rule and not God. God himself is a constitutional monarch whose authority has been totally delegated to the people and whose function is entirely ceremonial. The liberal believes in God with the same rhetoric fervor which she believes in heaven. The government erected upon such a faith is very little different in principle from a government erected on total disbelief, and whatever present residue of stability is clearly pointed in the direction of anarchy." And he also says, in the Christian order, politics was founded upon absolute truth. The principal providential form of government took union with the Christian truth was the Orthodox Christian emperor, wherein sovereignty was vested in a monarch, and authority proceeded from him downwards through a hierarchical social structure. On the other hand, a politics that rejects Christian truth must acknowledge the people as sovereign and understand authority as proceeding from below upwards. In a formally egalitarian society, it is clear that one is the perfect inversion of the other, for they oppose in this conception both of the source and of the end of government. Orthodox Christian monarchy is government divinely established and directed ultimately to the other world. Government with the teaching of Christian truth and the salvation of souls as its profoundest purpose. Nihilist rule, who most fittingly is anarchy, is government established by men and directed solely to this world. Government which has no higher aim than earthly happiness. Right? So it's like kind of like a kingdom of man instead of a kingdom of God. Well, these people sort of seen themselves as, better czars, really, but they were totalitarians. They wanted control over everything. In the words of Lenin, he told, I believe he told Sergius this, who was the puppet patriarch they set up in, the Soviet church. He told him, if you want a church, we'll give you a church. But it'll be our church, you know. If you want a patriarch, we'll give you a patriarch, but it'll be our patriarch. So, and they were atheists and they wanted complete control. And there were some that rejected this, that were known as like catacomb Christians, or the true Orthodox of Russia. And then you had those that went along with, the atheist and were subservient to them. And Sergius pointed out churches to blow up and, send people to the gulags with them. And these were known as, um, the Sergianists, as opposed to the Tikhonites. So, all right, and you could find out more about that kind of in my episode on my reading from the Catacomb Church and a few other things. Probably, I'm sure you can find a lot on that. But we're gonna get back to that paper from Vladimir Moss. We kind of got off track. Not really, but okay. Correct. Okay, I'm just seeing these comments now. Yeah. Creation of Russia from the early 19th century. Yeah. Ironically, the Bolsheviks were numerically in the minority, and the Mensheviks were numerically in the majority. That's interesting. And the University of America started calling the Enlightenment the Endarkenment. It is really. Um, oh, that's crazy. He built it out of his own pocket. Exactly. They fell for it. Indeed. He was the Bolshevik patriarch. Okay, so, and I appreciate everybody that's watching. So we're going to get back to this paper from Vladimir Moss on the Masonic plot against Tsar Nicholas II now. So we kind of got a backstory on, who the Bolsheviks are, that Lenin was a part of the Freemasons. So we got a little bit of an idea. So now we're going to get into really what's going on here. So it says, uh, I.L. Solonovich sees the Masonic aristocracy as no less guilty of the revolution than the Jays. The whole of the 19th century was filled with the struggle of the um, autocrat, against the aristocrat elite. In this struggle where both warring sides perished. However, the monarchy perished with some chance of resurrection, but the aristocracy with absolutely no chance. I am speaking of the destruction as a ruling class. The roots of this, it says, quote, the roots of this struggle go deep into the past, perhaps as far as Kalita and the Terrible One, but we shall not descend into the depths of the ages. We shall only call that while the mystical beginning of the Russian Revolution is usually ascribed to the Decembrists, there were no Jays among them. Then there came Belinsky, Chernyshevsky, Chernyshevsky. I don't know these Russian names, and Bakunin and Herzen and Plekhanov and Lovrov and Milyukov and Lenin, and many other soldiers of the rational, the good, and the eternal. In the course of a whole century, they shook and undermined the building of Russian statehood. All this work was covered by the moral authority of Prince Peter um, uh, Kropotkin, who had not been bought by the Jays, and court Leo Tolstoy, who, although taking no bribes from the Jays, undermined both the state and the church, and even the family, very thoroughly. And anyways, and any Birchev, chemist from the J Bund, or from the Bolsheviks in his struggle again of the order created by history, could have taken me by the lapel and said, "Listen, are you an intelligent person? Can you see that I am walking in the steps of the best lights of Russian thought?" And quote, and what could I, as an intelligent person, reply to this chemist? Truly, he was walking in their steps, and Chernovitsky really was a light. Quote, if we, out of the whole, this extraordinary, complicated combination of factors that was making and supporting the revolution, concentrate our fire only on Jayery. Okay, so I'm sure you guys get what I'm saying with that. I just can't say that on YouTube, so that's why I'm kind of avoiding it. Because I'm sure I have some people that'll just like, kind of report my video as soon as I step out of line. Um, one moment. Okay, so it says, and then we lost the plot. It's not so simple, they say. The Jacob Schiff gave money for the Russian Revolution. Yeah, he did. But the old ritualist, Sava Morozov, also gave money for the same revolution. And Germany gave more than any. Not the Germany of Wellmore and Herbert, and still less, Mr. Mustache. So, but the Germany of the Hohenzollerners. I don't know. It's no secret for anybody that all these enriched truths were published on the German money. When in the Kashinkaya Palace, German marks were valued above all. But if you simplify the matter to such a degree that one can make a revolution in the world of money, then the October Revolution was made on German money. However, it was with the closest and most powerful participation of almost the whole of Russian Jewry. End quote. So the elite autocracy. Uh, Hold on one second. Sorry. Okay, so he's saying Schiff gave Trotsky 20 million in American gold dollars initially. That we know about. Schiff's son said it was much more than that. Chernyshevsky. I appreciate you, man. You know what, man? I'm trying with these words, and sometimes, like, you know, I want to look them up just so I know for like a future time or something. Like, so I'm not just like constantly making these mistakes. But and like the more I do these readings, I'm starting to realize that maybe I should read the paper before I do the show, and then like, okay, so here's the words that I'm having trouble with, so I don't just like kind of embarrass myself when I go live. But whatever, there's no fakery here. It is what it is. What's up, Dogma Free? Okay, so we're getting back to the paper. So it says, and so the elite laid the main weight of the struggle against the monarchy on their own shoulders. Then they were joined by the Chinsty. Bro, it's so bad. And by the last decade of the past century, this anti-monarchist front received powerful support from the whole of the Russian Jewry. Father Lev Lebedov writes, "Oh, this guy, I see this guy's name everywhere. Um, if I think it's the same person, I'm pretty sure it is." His father, Lev Lebedev, writes, quote, "Soon after the Manifesto of October 17, 1905, which gave certain freedoms, legal Masonic lodges which before had been banned began to appear. And although, practically speaking, secret masonry never ceased to exist in Russia, the absence of legal lodges was for Masons a great obstacle. A reserve was being prepared in France by the Grand Orient. Already in the 60s, some Russians had entered French Masonry in Paris. Among them was the writer T.S. Turgenev, later Great Prince Nicholas Mikhailovich, the Bixiot Lodge, and then the philosopher V. Verabov, the psychiatrist in Baheznov, and the electrophysicist P. Yablokov. The historian, oh, here we go. Just like one name after another. That's wild. The historian M. Klavatsky and the 1887 Cosmos number 288. Lodge was founded for the Russians, the writers. Oh, this is so annoying. A. Amp Titrov and the Zemstoy activist V. Makalakov and the activists of culture V.N. Nermovich Danchenko. From the 1900s, the Masonic Russian School of Social Sciences began to work in Paris, and there arose another Russian lodge, the Mount Sinai, at the beginning of 1906 with the agreement of the Grand Orient of France. M. Kolovsky opened a lodge of French obedience in Russia. The first lodge was joined already. Okay, so it says, here's a footnote. It says, Solonovich, the Russian Revolution, and Jewry. All right, that's a book. That was released in 2007. That's from page 26 and 27. Both Cosmos and Mount Sinai were under the Supreme Council of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, according to Mason Boris Telepanov, Russian Assistant Council in Paris in 1922, an outline of the history of Russian Masonry. So they were part of the Scottish Rite. All right. Kovalsky, Bahaznov, Makalov, Nemirovich, Danchenko, and also new people such as S. Kotlarovsky, E. Kedrin, and the jurist, the historian V.O. Klovotsky, Prince S. Urosov, the Jewish doctor and lawyer M. Margelis, and the diplomat Lors Milikov, and others. This lodge had two main affiliates in Moscow, Regeneration, and in St. Petersburg, the Polar Star. They were opened by two high-ranking Masons, Shinskol and Bullet, who came especially from France. Later, in 1908, they gave Polar Star the right to open new lodges in Russia without the prior agreement of the French. Many lodges with various names appeared, such as the Iron Ring and Nissini, but the leading role continued to be played by the Polar Star, which was led by Count Orlov Doyevdov, and only Masons of no lower rank than 18th degree were admitted into it. The Masons were also joined by Cadet A. Kolobokin, Prince Bitov, Baron G. Mendel, and public library worker um, A. Barado, the historian, N. Pavlov Slavonsky, and P. Shigolev, and lawyers S. Blavansky and O. Goldovsky. The October is he's just this guy. I mean, if I could talk to Vladimir Moss right now, I'd probably cuss him out for this. So the October is AI Goldlove and his comrade in the party, E.M. Rodzenko, and the cabinet in NV Naros and the Workers' Party, AF. Okay, dude, what are we doing right now? In 1920, in 1912, through the User Minor Lodge, the Mischief, man, I'm about to give up. The Mensheviks, A. Galperin, the Bolshevik Trotsky, Lodoversky. Okay, dude. One second. If you want to learn some humility in life, try to read this paper. Um, so the Mensheviks, A. Galperin, uh, Chekhenzi, the Bolshevik Trotsky, Lunacharsky, Skvortsov, Stefanov, Cranston, Botsky, Sarada, Chenchurin, the millionaires I.N. Terochenko, A. Konalov, P.P. Robeshinsky, with his two brothers, Prince Obolinsky, Countess S.V. Panina, Baron V. Miller Sokolinski, and not to be confused with the general, M. Gorky, his wife, E. Peshkova, his godson, the J. Zenobius Pishkov, and the brother Ya Serdolov, their friend E.D. Kushkova, a female mason of the higher degrees, and her husband, S. Propakovich, uh, Prince G. Lubov, president of the Zemstova and city unions, and Prince Katitskov. This is terrible. The city commandment of Tiflis, and Prince Pogrulikov, and General P. Popotstov of the 33rd degree. Mark Aldanov, Fyodorov. Oh man, Kilinoko. This is so bad. Um, and very many other prominent activists of that time. There's a few other names there. I'm just not going for it. The list of the Russian Masons do not contain the name of Cadet Mason P. Milikov. He actually concealed his masonry, but only became because he had for a long time been in a purely French masonry. Masonic lodges appeared and functioned also besides Moscow and Petersburg and Kiev, Odessa, Nahitsny, Novgorod, Minsk, uh, yeah, and a bunch of other Russian cities. In the words of Kuskova, before 1917, the whole of Russia was covered by a net of Masonic lodges, of which many thousands of people were members. The Mason Boris Telepanev wrote, "The existence of Masonic lodges was discovered by the Russian government in 1909." Okay, so I'm just going to read this real quick. This is a footnote. According to George with a weird last name, uh, Kerensky also belonged to the Grand Orient of the Peoples of Russia and the Scottish Rite, and he was a 32nd degree. Um, it says something about the White Army and a little bit of the. Yeah, okay, so he's talking about this Telepanif guy. Reported that two Russian lodges have been reported in Paris under the auspices of the Grand Lodges of France, while a Russian lodge existed in Berlin. The Northern Star Lodge, under a warrant of the Grand Lodge of the Three Globes, Richard Ronda, Russian Freemasonry, a new dawn, and a paper read at the Grand Orient Lodge number 15 on June. Okay, so I think they got a, if I'm not mistaken, that's a link maybe to that paper on this paper, so that's pretty cool. I'm gonna check that out later. It says the authorities that were of French origin. It was then decided by the Russian lodges to suspend work. This was done according to 1911, when some of their members decided to renew their activities with due prudence. One would not call these activities Masonic in any sense, as their chief aim was purely political, the abolition of the autocracy and democratic regime in Russia. They acknowledge allegiance to the Grand Orient of France. This political organization comprised about 40 lodges in 1913. In 1915 through 1916, disagreements arose between their members who belonged to two political parties, the Constitutional Democrats and the Progressives, and could not agree on a common policy. 10 lodges became dormant. The remaining 30 lodges continued to work and took part in the organization of the 1917 March Revolution and the establishment of the provisional government, their political aim being attained. The organization began to decay. 28 lodges existed on the eve of the Bolshevik Revolution, and since then, most of their members have left Russia. Lebedev continues, quote, besides lodges of the polar star structures, there also existed lodges of a mystical tendency. Among them were the Martinists. We just heard about them, old style headed by a Grand Master, Count Musin Pushkin, which was joined by many from the aristocracy rather, and even from the imperial family. Great princes Nicholas Nikolaevich, supreme commander of the Russian armed forces in 1914 and 15. We have a Peter Nikolaevich and a George Mikhailovich. Among them, at one time, was noted Mason and cultist Papias, who was the very act of Papias even helped to draw his Majesty Nicholas II, but was not successful. So we heard about him earlier from that other little paper. The little intro into this I did. So this Papias guy. Um, so among the mystics were the Masons, the Philalites, I guess Philalites, who were joined by the great Prince Alexander Mikhailovich, the brother of George, as a string of aristocrats, also 1,000 people in all. Their main occupation was spiritist seances, supposed communion with spirits and the souls of the dead, which quite a lot of the intelligentsia were interested in that at that time. And finally, there was a directly Satanist lodge, Lucifer, which included many of the creative sort. Basically, uh, decadents such as Vyacheslav Okanov, V. Borisov. So there was a straight, Satanist lodge, and I would say that Freemasonry as a whole is really like satanic. Um, Nikolaevich. All right. Yeah, exactly. This is still happening. Uh, yeah, I know. They're so hard to read, man. I tell you what. Oh yeah. All right, let's see. Let's see with this one. Thorgainov, Neof, Nif. Amphityotrov. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we're gonna continue on. Me badly reading these J-ish Russian names. Um, Authorities that they were of French origin. Where did I leave off? I kind of just lost my place. Okay. This was done accordingly until 1911. Wait. We were just there with the Lucifer Lodge, right? Okay. So we got a little footnote here. It says Pellentinov also reported that an independent lodge of the so-called Martin Nice Rite was formed among the entourage of Tsar Nicholas II under the name of the Cross and the Star, which suspended its work in 1916. Perhaps Great Prince Nicholas Mikhailovich Romanov, the chairman of the Russian History Society, was a member of the lodge. Edward Radzinsky, The Last Tsar, London Arrow Books, 1991, page 111, writes that he was a mystic, a mason, and a free thinker. In the family, he was called Mansour Agalate, or Agalit, and the 18th century liberal of d'Orleans was called VM something. Okay, so, quote, other Martinist lodges open, Apollinaris in St. Petersburg in 1910, St. John in Moscow, St. Andrew in Kiev in 1912, and a very curious lodge existed among the Russian Navy League, calling themselves uh, the Pileites. Besides philanthropic and intellectual work, it pursued a political aim in opposition to the Grand Orient lodges, namely the support of the monarchy of Nicholas II. Probably this movement arose in connection with the Paris branch of the Swiss Order of the Chevaliers Pileites, which established two lodges in St. Petersburg, the Pyramid of the North and the Star of the North. Both pursued studies of mysticism and symbolism. So that's from a work called Russian Freemasonry about worshipful brother Dennis Stocks and Baron Barnett Lodge. You know, so there's a link I think to maybe to that book, I guess, on the paper. Apollonius, yeah, right. You must be reading along with me, I guess. I need it, man. Let's see. Uh, Vyacheslav Ivanov. Vyacheslav Ivanov. Right. Okay. And Nikolaevich Nicholas Ivanov Johnson. Apollonius. Okay. Apollonius. Apollonius. My lives have lately been just you know, me and John MC going through teaching me how to read. I need it though, seriously. Apollonius. Yeah. Okay. Apollonius. All right. I gave it an accent there. Um, On the direct orders of Grand Orient of France, Masonry extended its tentacles in the state apparatus and to the diplomatic corps. Thus, according in the data of Verberova in her book People and Lodges, the Masons in the diplomatic service of K.D. Nopokov England, and a few other of these people. It says, I quote, all the Masonic lodges in Russia were linked and communicated with each other and with foreign centers. First of all, with the Grand Orient of France, all of them together were ruled by a purely Jayish community called sometimes a lodge and sometimes an order, B'nai B'rith, which was at the head of the United World Zionism with its center in the USA. Okay, dude. Hmm. This might put a target on me. So, anyways, for the Western centers, the most important thing for a political point of view was Russian political masonry of the polar star structure. In 1909, it declared that it was liquidating itself. This was a maneuver well known from the time of the Decembrists. P. Pastel, whose aim, on the one hand, was to get rid of ballast and spies that had penetrated into its midst, and on the other hand, to create a new secret union for political struggle that would not be subject to the suspension and danger in its legal brothers were in. Thus, in the same year of 1909, a deeply conspiratorial military lodge was formed. Uh, Headed by A.I. Gluchkov, and in 1910, the Ursa Minor Lodge, for which the state society in which the main roles gradually became played by this Prince G. Lilov and E.M. Rodzenko and A.F. Karinsky and N.V. Nekrovsov and P.P. Uh, Rybushkinsky. Rybushkinsky. Over them, that is, over the whole of Russian Masonry of this tendency, there weighed the Masonic oath of fidelity to the Grand Orient of France, which was given already in 1908 in the form of a special document called obligation. This oath obligation was kept faithfully both before and after the self liquidation and the emergence of a new leadership and a new structure in 1910. This leadership declared its formal independence from Russian Masonry, but with the agreement of the French of the Grand Orient. The new leadership significantly simplified the reception of new members. It rejected, for conspiratorial reasons, many elements of Masonic symbolism and ritual, and thereby became, in the language of the Masons, unlawful. But all this was a part of the conspiracy. So then, in the event of something world Masonry could declare it complete non-involvement in the conspirators in the conspiracy. So, oh wow. So these guys didn't want any of the symbols, they didn't want any of that, and this was to hide their who they really were, I guess. I guess that's what they're saying, right? So, it, in actual fact, the whole course of the conspiracy was led and controlled precisely through the foreign Masons, through the embassies of Germany, England, and France and Russia. In 1910, Gluchkov, a long time member of the State Council and Third State Duma, became the president of the Duma. However, in 1911, he voluntarily resigned from this post, which was immediately taken by his brother Rodzianko. In 1913, Gluchkov and other brothers created a secret Supreme Council of Peoples of Russia, which was joined up by up to 400 members of the presidents of the lodges knew only its secretaries. Nikorosov, Karinsky, Tarachenko. Each new lodge consisted of no more than 12 members. The council is in its covenant coordinating the actions of the military lodge and the structures of the Ursa Union. At the time, Guchkov headed the military committee of the State Duma and was in charge of the defense questions in accordance with service obligations. He was linked with the Grand Staff and the most prominent military men, diplomats, and industrialists. Gradually, one by one, Guchkov attracted into his military lodge generals N.N. Univodsky, A.S. Lukomovsky, A. Polkovonov, A.Z. Molshoneyovsky, V.I. Gorkov, Colonel Baron Korf, and then Generals A.M. Alexiev, N.V. Ruski, A.M. Kromov, L.G. Kornilov, A.F. Brusilov, A.F. Menokovsky, and V.F. Daholkovsky, and many other eminent officers. How you like that, huh? I appreciate it. Pretty much, I guess so, right? I don't know. I think you know they're all a part of kind of this pyramid scheme of world masonry. Like, so there's different lodges that are all kind of connected, right? And yeah. So yeah, I think that's how it kind of works. But anyways, in essence, in the years 1909 and 1913, Golchkov had already prepared a general plan of action, which he borrowed from the Young Turk Masons in 1908 in Turkey, where he went specifically to study the experience of the Turkish Revolution. The essence of the plan consisted in higher military officers, including those in the Tsar's closet entourage, being able at the necessary moment to isolate their monarch from all the levers of the administration and force him to whatever deed or word and conspiracy needed at that moment. Quote, and as we can see, Masonry contained prominent activists and members, the leaders of most all the parties and major organizations. Kerensky later recalled that in Masonry they almost never allowed themselves to violate the unity of the Brotherhood by party disagreements. But in public, a sharp polemic between parties went on, a struggle that sometimes to see irreconcilable to the public, the profanes, so that whatever party came to power in the event of revolution, there would in any case be brother Masons at the helm of this power. This is the craziest quote I've ever seen. This is unbelievable. This is actually unbelievable. So this is what we're seeing in America, guys. If you don't think that this is what's happened or what's going on here, like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, this paper is unbelievable. That was unreal. I've been saying it. It's like the Hegelian dialectic, and then come to find out, Hegel is who trained Marx, and Marx pushed you know socialism, and now we have like this push for a communist world order. That's what the new world order is. This is so wild, man. And I remember talking about this when I was like 16 or 17 in high school, and people were like, shut up, you shut up, pothead, or something, you know what I mean? They're just kind of just really dismissive. But I mean, I didn't know all this information. I was kind of making like a wild guess, like, this stuff goes on, and it definitely does. Like, it's just kind of vindicative. um Unreal, man. Okay, so pretty interesting stuff. So it says Yana Sobova. Oh, there we go. Yana Sobova writes, quote, this group of Masons, about 300 people, had absolutely no interest in official aims of Masonry and rituals. They had their own clearly defined aim to gain political power in the Russian Empire. Their numbers were too small to effect a revolution on their own, but they were hoping that a coming great war would make their task easier. This raised a problem, though. Would not the nationalist rivalries between different national lodges endanger the enterprise? After all, thus Oleg Platonov points out, quote, all the main Masonic orders of the warring countries were in favor of war. the Great National Lodge of England, the Grand Orient of France, the Grand Orient of the Nations of Russia, the Old Prussian Lodges, and the Great Lodge of Hamburg. The latter was the foundation of the Great Serbian Lodge, members of which were involved in the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand Sarajevo. However, whatever their personal nationalism, the Masons of different countries were united in their desire to destroy the monarchy in its traditionally orthodox autocratic form. And as we shall see, the overriding aim proved stronger than any national war in 1917. So their main goal was to take out the Orthodox Tsar because he was Orthodox, because he was not a Mason, because he wasn't willing to, bow to their Luciferian God. And, the way they view things is that, the God of the Bible is the devil, and Lucifer is the great enlightener that brought, knowledge to man, and he's the true God, Um, or I think they almost say that both of them are God, like God and Lucifer are God. Adonai. They say Adonai is just an evil God that hates science or something, and they say that their science will overcome him and all this stupid stuff. So, however, whatever their personal nationalism, the Masons of different countries were united in their desire to destroy the monarchy in its traditionally orthodox autocratic form. And as well as we see, the overriding aim proved stronger than any national war aim in 1917. The man to watch here was A.I. Glutskov, the old ritualist and Masonic leader of the Octobrists. Armis, a pseudonym for a Duma delegate and a former friend of Gluchka, wrote, quote, already in 1909, in the Commission of State Defense, as president, the well-known political and social activist Gluchkov declared that it was necessary to prepare by all means for a future war with Germany. Quote, in order to characterize this activist, it is necessary to say that in order to achieve his ends, he was never particularly squeamish about methods and means. In the destruction of Russia, he undoubtedly played out of the chief roles. Quote, in the following year, in 1910, the newspaper Novi Vremya became a joint stock company, and a little later, Gushkov was chosen as president of its editorial committee. From this moment, there began the columns of the Novi Vremya, a special campaign against the Germans and the preparation of public opinion for the war with Germany. So this Freemason gets a hold of this notable newspaper and he starts pushing his propaganda. I mean, these are constants. This is what we're going to deal with. Whenever we're dealing with news, whenever we're dealing with anything that comes from the media, who is behind it? Who's pulling the strings? And we got to be aware that, these people will create groups just to pit them against each other. It's a divide and conquer game. And a lot of times they're playing sleight of hands. That will get you watch this hand, and then with the other hand, they're stealing out your pocket in some way. Um, a lot of distractions, a lot of psyoping, a lot of, just this type of stuff is going on. And in order to not get carried away with the gloom and doom of this world, we have to be forming the soul properly, as Father Seraphim Rose says. I'm not perfect, and I have my own issues in life, but I'll tell you this, that the more I'm looking into patristic texts, the more I'm speaking with, my spiritual father, or I'm partaking in the services of the church and, commemorating the saints, I feel a change in my life. And when you're living your life and dedicating it toward Christ, even in your suffering, it becomes okay. You know, um, you know, I, I I guess what I'm trying to say here is that, you know it's okay to kind of look into the conspiracy theories and stuff, but I don't think it's okay to get caught into the despair of, the way things are, because that's kind of what the demons do. they don't really care about tempting you that much. It's not so much you falling into sin because you can repent. What they want you to do is to fall in despair. Because once you despair, then you're in a state that they can try to drag you down to the pits of hell. Really, I think that's the way it is. Uh, yeah, you're good. You're good. I appreciate you even listening. Truly, like I you know. So, so um, in order to characterize this activist, it's necessary to say that in order to achieve his ends, he was never particularly squeamish about the methods and means and instruction of Russian. Okay, we read that. Zhukov wrote to the workers of the Novo Romia Golos Moskvis, uh, Moskiv, and Golos Providi, which were unfailingly ruled by his directives. Rattle your something a little more, prepare public opinion for war with the Germans, write articles in which a way that between the lines will already be heard pearls of weapon thunder. Okay, so he's telling them to push propaganda. People who know Guchkov well say that his flat, together with the well-known a Kazunin, uh, Kazuin, Kazunin rather, he composed articles of the most provocative character in relation to Germany. Okay, so there's a book called Russian's Crown of Thorns, Moscow, 1998, page 344. It says, quote, in the course of the investigation of the case of the murder of the Archduke Ferdinand, it emerged that the assassins Princip and Gorbalovich were Masons. The plan of the assassins was worked out by the political organizations the People's Defense. Later, already in 1926, it represented the Masonic circles of Serbia. Lazarevich, a Masonic banquet in the house of the Serbian Guard in Belgrade, officially recognized that Masonry and the People's Defense are one and the same. So that was page 344. See also V.F. Ivanov, Russian intelligentsia, and uh, Mason Masoninu Petra. I do not something in Russian. The Russian intelligentsia and masonry from Peter the First to our days. So that's a book that came out in Moscow in 1997. This page is 395 through 398. Those books seem pretty interesting. Like everything kind of Moss sort of alludes to. You could tell he's well read into the topic. I don't agree with everything the man says. I think there's some people that try to pin that on you if you do read from it. It's like, oh, like they'll rather slander the man or kind of denounce the man instead of face the work, and that's always strategic. A lot of these world Orthodox guys do stuff like that. They'll just ad hominem attack somebody's name, instead of the actual work. Without, it's a strategy. So, in 1912, during a reception for an English military mission, Gluchkov turned to those present with the following toast. He said, "Gentlemen, I drink to the health of the English army and the fleet, who are not only our friends but also our allies." And within the close circles of the members of the Commission of the State Defense, he declared, oh, I thought those were him reading. Okay, so today, Germany has suffered a decisive defeat. War is inevitable, if only the Tsar does not stop it. In March 1914, Guchkov at one dinner warned his acquaintances that they should not go abroad in the summer, and in particular, not to Germany. He says, I don't advise you to go abroad. War will unfailingly break out in the summer. It has been decided. Germany can turn as she wants, but she cannot turn away from war. And at these words, Gushkov smiled. To the question of one of those present who needed a war, Gushkov replied, France must have uh, something, Lorraine and Rhine, Russia, all the Slavic lands, and an exit from the Black Sea. England will lap up the German colonies and take world trade into her hands. To the objection that the Russian German emperors would hardly enter such a dangerous world war, there followed Gulchkov's reply, a bold reply. He said, "We have foreseen this, and we shall arrange it so that both of them will find themselves before a fait accompli." Then it was pointed out to Gulchkov that the Triple Alliance represented a formidable military power, to which Gulchkov objected. Quote, Italy, in accordance with a secret agreement with England, will not be on the side of Germany and Australia, and if the war goes well, can stab them in the back. The plan of the future war has already been worked out in detail by our allied staffs, England, French, English, French, and Russian, and in no way will the war last more than 3 months. When then Gluchkov was asked, quote, "Tell us, Alexander Onovich, don't you think that the war may be prolonged, contrary to your expectations? It will require the most colossal exertion of national nerves, and very possibly it will be linked with the danger of popular discontent." Coup d'etat. Smiling, Gutchkov replied, in the extreme case that the liquidation of the dynasty would be the greatest benefit for Russia. Wow. So Gutchkov's prognosis was extraordinarily accurate. This leads us to conclude that the war in Europe and Russia and the revolution in Russia were, if not, quote, inevitable, as many thought, at any rate to a large degree determined by the Masonic solidarity of the elites and the combatant powers. Only one human actor, as Golshkov admitted, can still say no and stop it: the Tsar, and only the one divine actor could prevent it, if the people were worthy of it. He who said of himself, quote, "I am he who makes peace and creates wars," Isaiah 45:7. In this connection, it is important to take into account a conversation that the Tsar had with the members of the Rothschild banking family, which was, of course, both Jayish and Masonic, at a ceremonial dinner in Dunkirk in 1901. Quote, "The billionaire Rothschild suggested that Russian debt to France could be written off in exchange for the Jays being given equal rights in Russia. The Tsar refused, saying that the Russian people was very trusting, and in conditions of equal rights would be quickly to fall into the Jayish cabal. On leaving Rothschild, the Tsar said, 'Now I have signed my death sentence.'" That's the most important thing we need to take into account about what this paper I'm reading right now. Rothschild, this is something that a lot of people don't know. Marx was related with the Rothschilds. So this is a little deeper. This is the exact bloodline of Marxism. This is who the Rothschilds are. They're, the whole Grand Orient. This is who's behind the Tsar's martyrdom. 1917, and it's not a conspiracy. Like, this is very real. You know what I mean? It's pretty devastating stuff. Indeed. What did Freemasonry have to do with the Russian Revolution? Everything. That's what I'm reading about right now. Uh, they were behind it. So, I'll read that one more time. So, in this connection, it is important to take into account a conversation I had with the Tsar with the members of the Rothschild banking family, which was, of course, both Jayish and Masonic. At a ceremonial dinner in Dunkirk in 1901, the millionaire Rothschild suggested that Russian debt to France could be written off in exchange for Jays being given equal rights in Russia. The Tsar refused, saying that the Russian people was very trusting, and in conditions and equal rights could quickly fall into the Jayish cabal. On leaving Rothschild, the Tsar said, "Now I have signed my death sentence." So he knew it was coming. So the Tsar knew that there was a plot to overthrow him long before it was put into action. The Tsaritsa urged him to act against the plotters. The question arises, therefore, why did he not immediately imprison them? Archpriest Lebedov supposes that the Tsar too was tempted to deal with them, quote, simply and speedily. Remember his words that with men who have become bestial there is not and cannot be any other means of struggle besides shooting them, and that only the execution of a few can prevent a sea of blood. But there appeared before the Tsar at that time in the persons of Lvov, Rodzinko, Guchkov, etc., not bestialized criminal murderers like the Bolsheviks, but respectable people with good intentions. Yes, they were in error in thinking that by removing the Tsar from power they could rule Russia better than he, but this was a sincere error. They thought that they were truly patriots. It would have been wrong to kill such people. Such people should not even be sent to Serbia, that is, into prison. It was necessary to show them that they were mistaken, and how better to show them by the victory over the external enemy, a victory which was already in their hands and would be inevitable in the 4 to 5 months. The Tsar did not know that his closest generals had already prepared to arrest him and deprive him of power on February 22nd, 1917. Uh, wow. And the generals did not know that they were doing this precisely in order that 4 or 5 months' time there should be no victory. They had been decided in Benai or Brith in the original international Jayish organizations. Russia must not be among the victor countries. Therefore, through the German general staff, which also did not know about all the plots, but thought only about its own salvation and the salvation of Germany, and also directly from the banks of Jacob Schiff and others, we shall name them later. Huge sums of money had already gone to the real murderers of the Tsar and the fatherland, the Bolsheviks. Uh, this was the second echelon of plotters. It hid behind the first, the Russian Masons. It was on them, and not on the noble patriots, that the world of powers of evil placed their hopes. For they had no need at all of a transfigured Russia, even if on the Western their model, what they needed was that Russia and the great Russian people should not exist as such. For they, the powers of evil, knew great Russia better, incomparably better than the whole of Russian society, especially the despised intelligentsia. Did Guchkov know about the planned murder of the whole of great Russia? He knew. The Empress accurately called him cattle. Krinsky also knew, and also several special initiated Masons who hid this from the overwhelming majority of all the brothers. The other Russian Masons they specifically initiated had already had for a long time had secret links through Trotsky, M. Gorky, and several others with Lenin and the Bolsheviks, which the overshadowing of the majority of Bolsheviks too did not know. And quote, what did this majesty know? What did his majesty know? He knew that society was eaten up by Judeo-Masonry, and that in it was error and cowardice and deception, but he did not know that at the base of the error and its secret plans was treason. And he also did not know that the treason, cowardice, and deception were all around him. That is everywhere throughout the higher command of the army. And what is the Tsar without an army, without troops? Then there is the question, could the Tsar have learned in time about the treachery among the generals? Why not? Let's take, for example, Yanukovych or Gorkov or Korfa, or all of them together, whom Sukhomonov and pointed to a plotters already in 1909. Forgive me, I'm not great with these Russian names. Imprisoned under torture, such torture as they had with the Tsar Ivan and Peter, they would have said everything, given up on the rest. But then he, Nicholas II, would have needed to be truly like Ivan, the terrible, or Peter the First. From the beginning, that is, a Satanist and a born murderer psychologically, not trusting anyone, suspecting everyone, and sparing nobody. It is significant that the Majesty joined the names of the Tsars, the name of Paul I. That means that she had in mind not Satanism and bestiality, but only firmness. But she felt with striking pr- uh, perpicity that I must say that perpicity is perpicity. Yeah, that's how you say it. That her husband was suffering from the mistakes uh, of what's it say, of his royal predecessor. Which ones? Just as he said, first of all, and mainly for the mistakes precisely of Ivan and Peter. Not to become like them, these predecessors to overcome the temptation of the reply to evil with evil means. That was the task of Tsar Nicholas II. Not everything is allowed, and not all means are good for the attainment of what seem to be the most important ends. To the righteousness of God is not attained by diabolical methods. Evil is not conquered by evil. There was a time when they included also His Majesty Tsar Nicholas II, suppressed evil by evil. But in accordance with the providence of God, another time had come, a time to show where the Russian Tsar could himself become a victim of evil, voluntarily, and endure evil to the end. Did he believe in Christ and love him truly in such a way to suffer voluntarily like Christ? The same divine providential question was posed for the whole of the great Russia. This was the final test of faith. Through life, through death, if only can live only by killing and making oneself with evil the devil as those whom has to kill, then it would be better not to live. That is the cry of the Tsar and of great Russia that he headed. The more so that it was then a matter of earthly historical life. Here is this life, and in this history to die in order to live again in the eternal new history of the kingdom of heaven. For is there no other way to enter this heaven? The Lord left no others. He declared that it should be experienced only by this entry. That is what turned out to be his will, God's will. We recall His Majesty Nicholas II took all his most important decisions after ardent prayer, having felt the good will of God. Therefore, now considering earnestly why he then, at the end of 1916 and the very beginning of 1917, did not take those measures which his wife so warmly wrote to him about, we must inescapably admit one thing: he did not have God's good will in relation to him. Um, Her Majesty's thought is remarkable in itself that the Tsar, if he had to be ruled by anyone, should be ruled only by one who himself was ruled by God. There was no such person near the Tsar. Rasputin was not that person. His Majesty already understood this, but the Tsaritsa did not yet understand it. In this question, he was condescending to her and delicate, but as we see, he did not carry out the vice of their friend and did not even mention him in his replies to his wife. The Tsar entrusted all his heart and his thoughts to God, and was forced to be ruled by him alone. There is such a value of Lebedev's hypothesis, but it is too kind to the Masonic plotters. Yes, they were sincere, but so were the Bolsheviks. It seems unlikely that the Tsar should have considered the Bolsheviks worthy of punishment, but the Masons not. More likely, in our opinion, is that he thought that acting against the Masons would bring forward the revolution at precisely the moment when he wanted peace in the rear of the army. Must be remembered the Masons controlled the public organizations like the Military Industrial Committee, whose leader was the industrialist and conservative parliamentarian I.L. Glutskov, and the Simstrovs, whose leader was George D. Lvov, who happened to be the leader of the Russian Masonry. These, in spite of their disloyalty, were nevertheless making their contributions to providing ammunition for the army and helping the wounded. The emperor held the opinion that, quote, in wartime, West must not touch the public organizations. And so it was war that both created the conditions that made the revolution possible and provided the Tsar from taking the steps that were necessary in order to crush it. Many people think that the Russian Revolution was a result of an elemental movement of the masses. This is not true, although the masses joined it. The February Revolution was a carefully hatched plot involving about 300 Masons. Its organizer was Glutskov. The plot was successful, but it succeeded eventually bringing to power not the Masonic plotters, but the Bolsheviks, who destroyed all the plotters and all their Masonic lodges, forcing the Masons themselves to flee back in their mother lodges abroad. Thus, in October, Kerensky and his Masonic colleagues fled to France, where they set up lodges under the Grand Orient. Yana Sodova writes, quote, already in 1906, after a meeting with the emperor, A.I. Gulchkov came to an unexpected conclusion. We were in for still more violent upheavals. Then he wanted simply to step aside, but already in those years he began to talk about a coup d'etat. In the next few years, Gluchkov's attention was temporarily occupied in the work in the State Duma in 1911 after the murder of Stolypin, and he later recalled there arose in him an unfriendly feeling towards the Emperor Nicholas II. Hmm. Um, absolutely, yeah. So, at the beginning of 1913, at a meeting in Petersburg, Gluchkov talked about a military coup in Serbia. The discussion moved to a coup in Russia. At this point, one of the participants in the meeting said that the party of the coup is coming into being. Several months later, at a congress of his Octoberist party in Petersburg, Glutchkov proclaimed the principles by which he had governed in the next 4 years, in defense of the monarchy against the monarch. The next year, during the Great Retreat, Glutchkov created the military industrial committees, an organization whose official task was to help provide the army with ammunition. In fact, however, the committees turned out to be an instrument for the preparation of a coup. Mm. However, the Gushkov would probably have continued to the end of his life only to be platonically sympathize with the coup and do nothing himself if once there had not appeared in the flat the Russian Masonic leader, Envy Nekrosov. The two of them became initiators of a plan, a palace coup, as a result which His Majesty would be forced to sign his abdication, passing the throne, and his lawful heir. Soon, another Mason, I am Tereshchenko, joined the plot, and Guchkov recalled that three of us set about a detailed working out of this plan. On September 8, 1915, a quote, Committee of National Salvation issued, quote, Disposition Number 1. It affirmed, writes, in Kolov, that there were two wars going on in Russia against a stubborn and skillful enemy from outside and no less stubborn and skillful enemy from inside. The attainment of a victory over the external enemy was unthinkable without a prior victory over the internal. But the latter they had in mind in the ruling dynasty. For victory on the internal front, it was necessary immediately to appoint a supreme command staff whose basic core consists of Prince G.E. Lvov, A.E. Kuchkov, and A.F. Kerensky. So we got a Stormok considers that the main plotters were Golchkov, Prince G.E. Lvov, uh, Nikorosov, and Tereshchenko, all later ministers of the provisional government. Lvov was the leader of the Union of Zemstrova and its cities. Some of the plotters, many of them considered regicide. Uh, some of the plotters may have considered regicide. Yeah, so um, this Stormok writes in 1915 recounts the Mason A.F. Kerensky in his memoirs. It says, speaking of a secret meeting of representatives of a liberal and moderate conservative majority in the Duma and the State Council, which were discussing the Tsar's politics, V.A. Mokolokov, who was the highest degree conservative liberal, said it was possible to avert catastrophe and save Russia by only repeating the events of March 11, 1801, the assassination of, uh, you know, uh, Paul I. Kerensky reasoned that the difference in views between him and Mokolov came down only to time. for Kerensky himself had come to conclude that killing the Tsar was a necessity 10 years earlier. And besides, continues Kerensky, Mokololov and those who thought like him would have wanted the others to do it, but suggested that in accepting the idea, one could assume the whole responsibility for it and go on to execute it personally. Kerensky continued to call for the murder of the Tsar. In his speech at the session of the State Duma in February 1917, he called for the physical removal of the Tsar, explaining that they should do to the Tsar what Brutus did in time of ancient Rome. According to Glushkov, they worked out several variants on the seizure of power. One involved seizing the Tsar and the Tsarkokoye Sola of Peterhof. Another involved doing the same at the headquarters. They would have to involve some generals who were members of the military lodge, especially Alexev, a friend of Gluchkov's and Ruski. However, this might lead to a schism in the army, which would undermine its capabilities for war. So it was decided not to initiate the generals until a plot, although, as we shall see, they played a very important role and quite independently of Gluchkov's band. Prevented loyal military units from coming to the aid of the Tsar, and themselves demanded his abdication. A third variant worked out by another Mason, Prince D.I. Vyozemsky, uh, a military unit taking control of the Tsar's train between military headquarters and forcing him to abdicate in favor of Tsarevich. Yet another plan was to seize the Tsar on March 1st and exile him abroad. Guchkov claims that the agreement of some foreign government to this was obtained. The Germans got wind of these plans, and not long before 1917, the Bulgarian ambassador tried to warn the Tsar about them. The Germans were looking to save the Tsar in order to establish a separate peace with him, but the Tsar, in accordance with his promise to the Allies, rejected this out of hand. It was then that the Germans turned to Lenin. Wow. 1 second, please. Okay, so let's see. Uh, Yet another plan was worked out by Prince G. E. Lvov. He suggested forcing the Tsar to abdicate and putting our great Prince Nicholas Nikolaevich on the throne in his place. And Gushkov and Lvov and powers behind the throne, Lvov that had hopes of Nikolasha become, because in October he had other Romanovs, had tried to persuade the Tsar to adopt the constitutional path. Well, on November 6th, he had a stormy conversation with the Tsar at this Stovka, during which he had said, quote, "How shameful of you. It was to believe that I wanted to overthrow you from the throne." Then a private conversation with his nephew, Prince Andrew Vladimirovich Nikolasha, had confided to him that he had lost all hope of saving the Tsar from his wife and from himself. So on January 1st, Lvov sent a friend of his Mason, I.M. A.I. Katisov, Katsivov, I don't know how to say that name, to himself. So on January 1st, Lvov sent a friend of his, okay, I read that already, to Phil to speak with him and his wife Anastasia, and the notorious critic of the Tsarina, about his plot. According to S.S. Oldenburg, okay, wait, we got a footnote here. It says, settle off after arguing that generals were never initiated into Gulkov's plan, goes on. Quote, finally, nevertheless, that Gulchkov revealed his plan to Ruski, and this took place after all, already after the coup. On learning of the plot, Ruski cried out, quote, Ah, Alexander Ivanovich, if you had told me about this earlier, I would have joined you. But Gorchkov said, My dear, if I had revealed the plans, you would have pressed a button and adjacent would have come and you would have said, arrest him. Huh. So it seems that, you know, this guy probably would have ratted on him, and told, they're plotting to kill you, Czar, and had him locked up. But he's saying, okay, man, well, I don't buy it. If I would have told you, you would have. So the idea on the grounds of the monarchical sentiments of the army, Sedova claims that Lvov actually offered the throne of Nikolasha. In any case, as Katlov points out, there are no indications that Nikolai Nikolaevich rewarded Kutsov's approach to the corresponding authorities. Although so this is precisely what duty required, and in this way, the great prince willingly or unwillingly became a participant in a plot whose aim was to overthrow Tsar Nicholas II, followed by his own ascent to the throne. That is, there took place precisely that's what he said so sincerely renounced with an oath on November 6th. At a meeting between members of the Duma and some other generals in the study of Rodyanko in February 1917, another plot to force the Tsar to abdicate was formed. The leading roles in this were played by the generals Krymenov, Rutsky, Colonel Rodyanko, the Duma leader's son. Finally, the so-called naval plot was formed. Soljan recounts, according to which the Tsaritsa was to be invited onto a warship from England. Besides the formal conspirators, there were many others who helped them by trying to undermine to resolve the Tsar. Thus, quote, before the February coup, writes Yana Sadova, quote, in the Russian Empire, there were more and more attempts on the part of individual people to open the eyes of His Majesty to the internal political situation. This search for truth assumed a particular massive character in November 1916, beginning in November 1st, when the great Prince Nicholas Mikhailovich arrived at Stavka to have a heart-to-heart conversation with His Majesty. Quote, very many considered their duty to open the eyes of His Majesty. Great Prince Nicholas and Alexander Mikhailovich, Nicholas Nikolaevich, Paul Alexandrovich, and ministers Ignatia Pokrovsky, generals Alexeyev, and N.I. Ivanov. The ambassadors of allied governments, Botch Cannon and Paleolego, the presidents of the Duma, and Rozanko, proto-pressure of the Army and Navy, G. Shalivsky, and the chief representative of the Red Cross, P.M. Kaufman, the official A.A. Klopov, and the Dennis S. Koritsky. This is far from a complete list. It includes only conversations, but many of the addressed to His Majesty, and the letters try to influence the Emperor. Great Prince Alexander Mikhailovich was both who spoke with His Majesty and sent him a very long letter uh, when spoke of the Empress. It seemed, wrote Rodzienko later, that the whole of Russia was beseeching His Majesty about one and the same thing, and it was impossible not to understand and to pay heed to pleas of a land worn out by suffering. Quote, but what did the whole of Russia ask about? A rule about two things, the removal of dark powers and the bestowing of a ministry of confidence. The degree to which the boundaries between these two groups was blurred is evident from the fact that the Duma deputy Protopopov at first considered himself a candidate for the Ministry of Confidence, but then His Majesty truly appointed him a minister. The name of Protopopov immediately appeared in the ranks of dark powers, but the dark powers were usually understood Rasputin and his supposed proteges. Quote, it was less evident with the minister of confidence was for many this term had a purely practical meaning, and signified the removal from the government of certain ministers who were not pleasing to the Duma, and the appointment in their place of Milyukov, Rodzienko, and other members of the Duma. Quote, but the closer it came to the February coup, the demands that were in favor of a really responsible minister, a ministry that is a government which would be formed by the Duma and would only formally be considered by His Majesty. A responsible ministry was no longer a real monarchy, but the end of the autocracy, but not understood by everyone. Nobody at that time listened to the words of Sheklovitov, Sheklovitov. A monarchist who goes with a demand for a ministry of public confidence is not a monarchist. Um, wow, these names are really difficult for me. I'm trying pretty hard to get through this paper, but uh, I know it's true. It definitely is. You know, looking at this, like something, I'll read about this maybe either this stream or the next one, because I do plan on doing more on this subject because it's super important. A cosmic curse was kind of let out into the world at this time. You got the overthrow of the Tsar, who was kind of restraining this evil force in the world from taking over. Then you got the calendar change in 1920, shortly after, where Freemason ascends the ecumenical patriarch's throne and takes the position of the metropolitan of Constantinople and Meletius Montakis. All around the world, you have this uprising of Orthodox Christians that are rejecting this thing, but there's also this great apostasy that's released. If it seems almost as if Satan has been loosed a little bit. He's off his chain a little bit at this time. So, in this cosmic curse, it can't really be taken off the Russian people until they sort of renounce this. But you look at the a lot of these Russian people that say, well, the Tsar was weak, and the economy was better under Stalin and the Bolsheviks and the Soviets. They were just better. And well, what this does is that places that same cosmic curse on them, and until they repent of this, that will be on their heads. Um, you know, and the problem we see with the Moscow Patriarchate is, they did a glorification for the new martyrs, in, 2000. But, the issue with that is that, they don't want to even admit that they were martyrs in that glorification. They don't even want to say that, really, you know, um, because they're still uh, sort of venerating their communist past, the Soviet past rather. So it's like they want their cake, they want to eat it too. Uh, they want to glorify statues of Sergius who pointed out, you know, Orthodox believers to be killed and sent to Gulag. Um, they want to be a part of the ecumenical movement, but but they pose it as if, well, it's only for political purposes. We don't really believe in ecumenism. Well, by even participating in it, there's something wrong here. This is a you can't serve God and Mammon. So, uh, what do we got here? So, in general, all these conversations were quite similar and usually irrelevant. Nevertheless, His Majesty always listened attentively to what was expressed in them. Although by no means all his inoculators were easy to listen to. Quote, some of them, like many of the great princes of Rosianko, strove to impose their point of view and change his political course, demanding a ministry endowed with a confidence or even a responsible ministry. His master listened to them in silence and thanked them for their advice. Others, like General Alexeyev and S.F. Kostritsky, were under the powerful impression, not to say influence, of the Dumas speeches and political agitation, which the truly dark forces who had already thought up the February coup were conducting at that time. Those who had a regular report to His Majesty and whom he trusted were subjected to particularly strong pressure. They began to heart-to-heart conversation. His Majesty patiently explained to them in what he did not agree with them and why. Quote, there existed uh, a third category, which, like P.M. Kaufman, go through to His Majesty, even though they did not have a report to give, so to tell him the whole bitter truth. They did not clearly know what they wanted, and simply said everything they had built up in their souls. Usually they began their speeches with the question, could they speak to him openly, as if His Majesty would say no to such a question, and then spoke on the same two subjects, about the dark powers in the government. And so far as by the end of 1916, the same things, generally speaking, had built up in their souls. The speech of such a truth seeker usually ended in such a sad way. Coffin just said, allow me, I'll go and kill Grishka. And His Majesty had to calm them down and assure them that everything will work out. One cannot say that His Majesty did not listen to his inoculators. Some ministers had to leave their posts precisely because of the conversations. For example, on November 9th, 1916, His Majesty wrote to the Empress that he was stacking Sturmer. Uh, and this is so bad. I hate words like that. Since nobody trusted the minister. Every day I hear more and more about him. We have to take account of that. And on the same day, he wrote in his diary, my head is tired from all these conversations. So he knew that all this was going on, and he's sort of just like giving it to God, like, so be it. They're going, he's quoted just saying, like, all I see around me are cowards or something. I forget the quote. It's something like that. Um, I got the quote right here, actually. What's the exact quote? He said, "All see around me are cowards and deceit." That's what he said. Um, and that verse I was talking about lawlessness is 2 Thessalonians 2 and 7 and 8. And so I'll read this little text. It says, 1917, the Russian Tsar Nicholas II is betrayed and abdicates his throne. He is martyred with his family. Thus was accompanied the prophecy of the holy apostle Paul in reference to the Antichrist, when he wrote, quote, for the mystery of lawlessness is energizing itself. Only there is one who restraineth now, until he should come to be taken out of the midst, and then the lawless one shall be revealed. That's 2 Thessalonians 2 and 7 and 8, and that is Antichrist. Um, so yeah. So this is a little text right here that kind of details. It's not a part of this paper, but I have this saved, and I think it ties into this. It says the execution of Tsar Nicholas and his relatives were carried out by Jewish Bolsheviks under the direction of Germany, who sought to destroy Russia. The evidence for which was it was a black magic ritual. The main evidence for the involvement of religious Jays in the incident were four strange signs inscribed on the walls of the execution room. They were discovered during the investigation and later interpreted as secret Kabbalistic writings. deciphered by Enlil M.V. Skuratin in 1925, as mentioned previously, to read as follows. Here, by orders of mysterious forces, the Tsar was sacrificed for the destruction of the state. All people are to be notified about this. This murder was thought out and organized and had to be carried out by any means by the servants of the coming Antichrist, those who had sold their soul to Satan, and those who intensely prepared for the speeding triumph of the enemy of Christ, the Antichrist. They perfectly understood that their main obstacle was the Orthodox Tsarist Russia. Therefore, it was necessary to destroy the Orthodox Russia and arrange in its place an evil state opposed to God that would gradually spread its power over the entire world. And for the earliest and certain destruction of Russia, it was necessary to destroy the one who was the symbol of the country, the Orthodox Tsar. And now we're going to go to this very quickly. And so it's this is from the Orthodox Word number 142 through 143. It was released in 1988, and it's called the mystical meaning of the Tsar's martyrdom. And I'm only going to read it from a page of this. So it says, the devil already, it seems, had for a long time been trying to manifest Antichrist, but could not, because the divine grace, fully active through the anointing of God. Quote, he who restraineth did not give him such a possibility. In order for the quote mystery of iniquity to receive freedom from action, it was necessary from the mist to take from the mist the quote restraining one, which precisely occurred by the allowance of God because of the sins of the Russian people. Thus occurred the frightful deed, regicide. The emperor, the anointed of God, the protector of the Orthodox Church, the head of the Orthodox government, was killed. He who restraineth was killed, and from that moment the mystery of iniquity received freedom. And we are all witnesses to the unrestrained reign and propagation of evil in the whole world. From what we have said above, it is absolutely clear that the evil deed was ritualistic and not a political killing, which was demonstrated by the Kabbalistic signs on the walls of the cellar of the Apatiev house, where this truly satanic evil deed was performed, as Christ was crucified on Golgotha for the sins of the whole world and abandoned by all. So also was the emperor presented as a sacrifice for the sins of all Russia, and abandoned by all. No one rendered help to their emperor in the days of his temptation, when he was a prisoner of the God-fighting satanic power. Therefore, the mortal sin of regicide lies hanging all over the Russian people, and consequently, in this or that measure, over each one of us. If this is so, then in order to have at least a small hope of removing the sin from the conscience of Russia, it is necessary, besides our deep repentance, to canonize the emperor as the head of all the Russian new martyrs, who, by the way, we're you know we venerate them today on the Orthodox calendar, and that's part of the reason I did this. So, after all, he accepted a martyr end for the Orthodox faith, for the Holy Church, for his homeland. Here's what priest Gleb Yukonin writes concerning this. Quote, the tragedy of the imperial family lies as a curse upon the Russian land, becoming a symbolic prologue to the long path of the cross of Russia, to the perdition of tens of millions of its sons and daughters. The canonization of the royal martyrs will be for Russia the removal of the sin of regicide, finally freeing it from the evil spell. Um, so, yep, you're going to see it. Unfortunately, I mean that's you know, I kind of know what you're talking about because you kind of let me in on something, in my comments, and I would say, I would definitely not to, put your business out there in any way, but I'm just saying that I would probably look at that high treason video. I would, and I appreciate you kind of tuning in with me, Denise, and that's very, very cool of you to sort of explain that type of stuff. So I appreciate that, and I thank everybody for tuning in. Yeah, that curse still exists. It does. It's still on, our heads, kind of, on the heads of the Russian people and our own heads. If we don't sort of realize what's going on, this was a prophecy being fulfilled from the scriptures about this restraining one. You know, the restraining one was the czar. He was keeping this evil from sort of, going out in the world. I'll read that verse one more time for people. That was 2 Thessalonians 7-8. And it says, "For the mystery of lawlessness already is energizing itself. Only there is one who restraineth now until he should come to be taken out of the midst. And then the lawlessness, then the lawless one shall be revealed. That is the Antichrist." So, yeah, this is why we're kind of talking about this today. So, uh, we're going to get back to the paper. Um, I'm going to probably read another page or two of this because I still have more on this topic. So I'm going to return with more because there's a lot here that. Okay, so I'm probably going to end with this in just a second. By the beginning, everyone noticed his tiredness, and his binoculars began more often to foretell a revolution to him. Earlier, he could say to his visitor, "But you've gone out of your mind. This is all your dreams, and when did you dream it? Almost on every eve of our victory. And what are you frightened of? The rumors of the corruptions of Petersburg, and the babblings in Duma, who value not Russia but their own interests. From the memoirs of Mamatov, and then the conversation came to an end. But now he had to reply to the most senseless attacks, and he replied to the rumors of the betrayal and the entourage of the emperor. What, in your opinion, am I a traitor? To the diagnosis made of Dubai by the proto-Popov, when did he begin to go mad? When I appointed him a minister to demand to deserve the confidence of the people, but it's not that my people has to deserve my confidence. However, they did not listen to him. The Masons began to execute their plan on January 1917. In that month, they arrived in Petrograd at an Allied commission composed of the representatives of England, France, and Italy, whose purpose was to combine Allied strategy for the coming year. After the meeting with Gorchkov, who was president of the Military Industrial Committee, Prince G. Lovov, and President of the State Duma Rodyanko, General Polivano, and Sozanov, and the English ambassador Buchanan, Milyukov, and others, the mission presented the following demands to the Tsar. 1. The introduction into the staff of the Supreme Commander of Allied Representatives the right of a decisive vote. 2. The removal of the command staff of all the armies on the indication of the heads of the entity. 3. The introduction of the Constitution with a responsible ministry. The reply to these demands, which amounted to a demand that he renounce both his autocratic powers and his powers as a commander in chief of the Russian armies, as follows. 1. The introduction of allies representatives is unnecessary, for I'm not suggesting that your introduction of my representatives into the allied armies with the rights of a decided vote. 2. And also unnecessary, my armies are fighting with greater success than the armies of my allies. And 3. The act of the international administration belongs to the discretion of the monarch and does not require the indication of the allies. So he's basically like, "Get out my face." When this truthful and courageous reply was made known to the plotters, they assembled in the English embassy and decided, to abandon the lawful path and step on the path of revolution. So they decided to kill him, since he told them basically to go after yourself. Thus, the English embassy, wrote Prince Palais in the Orders of the Loyal George, became a nest of propaganda. The liberals, Prince Lovov Milyukov, my bad, um, used to meet there constantly in the English embassy, that the decision was to take into abandon legal paths and step out on the path of revolution. Okay, so we got about 9 pages left. I'm gonna save that for next time. I appreciate everybody that tuned in with me, and this is awesome that you guys kind of hang out and we can talk about these subjects. And I don't know. I think it's a very important topic that I recommend everybody kind of look into more. Don't trust what I'm saying. Just look at the information yourselves and make out with it what you can, I guess. And so this is Unseen Warfare. I appreciate everybody for tuning in, and I'll come back with some more on this topic. And I want to thank you guys again. Later.